I want to first start by talking about the difference between singers and instrumentalists. Okay, this is something you probably know, but it's just good to be reminded of. That singers learn music differently from the way instrumentalists do. Okay, it's just kind of a basic difference. It's assumed, I remember a number of years ago, a newscast that was talking about, I think it was Mahalia Jackson, was taking piano lessons from a professor at Yale. And the news commentator was saying, wouldn't you hate to be her piano teacher? Well, why? She's taking piano lessons because she wants to learn how to play the piano. He's the expert, in that area. So just because she's a great gospel singer doesn't mean she can play the piano. And so, there's that thing. So we learn music differently between vocalists and instrumentalists. But playing an instrument's much more mechanical than being a singer. You press the right key, put your finger on the right place of the fret, you push the right lever, and the sound, you get the right pitch. Now I realize that's simplistic and not entirely accurate, but for singers, they have to kind of pull the pitch out of the air, so to speak. So there's going to be a difference there. Singers also have another added responsibility besides the right pitch and the right rhythm, that sort of thing. What's that other thing that singers have to be concerned with?
Watching the conductor.
Okay, well, hopefully instrumentalists are too.
Timbre.
Being heard, I don't know. Watching the conductor.
Finding the pitch.
They have words.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey, you're trying to be too technical.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, they have to deal with breath and all that, but some instrumentalists do as well. But they also have that responsibility of words. The purpose of singing is, of course, to be understood, and also to make beautiful sounds. So you do have that other responsibility. So none of this is to say that singing is more difficult than playing an instrument. Okay, but just that there are different challenges involved between those. Of course, another thing that you have to realize about church choir singers particularly is they probably never had a voice lesson in their life. Whereas an instrumentalist will typically maybe start in junior high band, or take private lessons, or do both, and play in bands or orchestras up through at least high school, if not beyond. If a singer does take voice lessons, though, they don't start nearly as early as instrumentalists do. Why do they not start as early as
The voice is
instrumentalists?
always changing.
Yeah, because their voice has to mature before they can really take voice lessons. Occasionally get some mother who wants her 6-year-old daughter to take voice lessons because she wants to be the next American Idol, wants her to be that or something. Well, it's just not going to work because the voice is not going to mature for about another 10 years at least. Well, it's not mature then, but it's at least getting that way. And in church choirs, the emphasis is typically on getting music ready for the next Sunday, not on long-term training. If you involve yourself in the long-term training, you're better off in the long run, but you still got that Sunday by Sunday responsibility coming up. So the upshot of this for a director is that the director has to do more for singers than they do for instrumentalists. Instrumentalists just naturally do some things on their own that you have to show as a director of the choir to do. An instrumentalist typically sees a P on the music, and what do? They play softer. A choir singer sees a P on the page and says, what does that mean? Or doesn't even notice it. Sing louder there. So we have to give more to the church choir than we do to almost any other type of ensemble. So some of the principles here, first of all, is organization. Okay, I think this is where we can all maybe benefit. This is really the key to success, I think, is to be organized in your approach to directing a church choir. First of all, you should plan the music weeks or months in advance. If you go from Sunday to Sunday, that creates some real problems for you. What are some reasons for planning far in advance?
Practice.
Practice, okay. In what sense?
Well, in the sense that, when the choir gets together weekly, you can be working on those anthems that are coming up, say,
Right.
the next month or so at least.
Yeah. I've found that it's a lot better to work on a piece for 10 minutes in one rehearsal over 6 rehearsals than work on one piece for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
They learn it a lot better. And furthermore, that you don't work on the whole piece for those 10 minutes. You work on a specific section of it and learn that section thoroughly. The next week you review that section and then bite off another chunk of it. And actually I try to learn the anthem. If I'm gonna do it for 6 weeks, I try to have it learned by the end of the 5th week. And then the 6th week is the final polishing and that sort of thing. Now, it doesn't always work. I've directed some choirs where I only had 30 minutes for rehearsal. So you can't work as far in advance and you adjust that. So giving them time to rehearse it. What are some other reasons for long-term planning?
If the song isn't working out, you can change it.
Yeah, yeah.
Do some creative editing. I mean, we had that recently with an anthem that the ending, it was just melodically they weren't getting it, and so we just instead took a tag from one of the
Mhm.
previous verses and made that the ending, and
Yeah.
it still worked.
Yeah. If something can go wrong, it will. So, I never get to someplace right on time. I get there, if I'm not 30 minutes early, then I'm late, because what if I have a flat tire? What if I do this and so? Some more practical reasons, if you gotta order music, you gotta have time for it to get there, you gotta have time for it to be cataloged and prepared, for the rehearsal, so, plus give it to the accompanist ahead of time, I can't stress that enough. Even if you're a pianist, like I've had some really fabulous ones who decide to read anything. Well, I don't trust anybody, so I give it to them ahead of time and make sure there are no rough patches in it that they can't handle. Or at least be able to make suggestions as to how to do it. And I'll say more about accompanists later. Another aspect of organization is making sure the music is ordered well in advance and is available when you need it. I know I've had times when I've either ordered something at the last minute or I ordered it in plenty of time, but it didn't come, it's on back order, and this and that, and you just start getting nervous about that sort of thing. Another important component of rehearsals or organizations to prepare a rehearsal plan. And this is something that I would write out a rehearsal plan. Now, when I started out, I would simply, okay, I'm gonna rehearse these pieces today. But then I got down to a more specific kind of plan where I said, the rehearsal starts at 7 o'clock. So at 7 o'clock, we're gonna do a vocal warm-up from 7 o'clock to 7:05. 7:05 to 7:15, we're going to rehearse Amazing Grace. 7:15 to 7:25, we're gonna do the first section of the Hallelujah chorus from 7, and I would put it not in, I'm gonna work on 10 minutes, but the specific times, because in the heat of rehearsal, I forget, when did we start on this piece? And I would also have on the rehearsal plan the specific measures we're going to work on. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on this part, we're gonna learn this really well. That includes not just the notes and the rhythms, but how to pronounce the words, the style with which we sing it, legato, staccato, whatever, and that sort of thing. And of course, I'd start with a master plan where on this anthem, I lay out exactly how we're going to do it. The other thing on that rehearsal plan I would have is how many weeks we still have to work on it. So I put a 1 if it's the one for this Sunday. If it's 5, then that means I got 5 weeks there. So I find that to be very helpful in keeping me on track there and keeping the rehearsal moving. There's enough time to work thoroughly on a section of music, but you're also not kind of spinning your wheels as, well, that was pretty good, now let's do it all again, kind of thing, and just singing through it several times. That's not really very valuable, because what you're doing is teaching the wrong notes. If they're singing wrong notes, you're teaching them that, and the more often it gets repeated, then they have problems with that. Another kind of principle is rehearse at least 5 pieces in each rehearsal. Again, unless it's a special circumstance. It works better in the long term, and this assumes a rehearsal of at least an hour. If you have less time than that, then you might have to cut down the number of pieces. And this differs from most instrumental rehearsals, where you might use a single rehearsal to rehearse one long piece. I know I sometimes sit in on the band and orchestra rehearsals here, and they'll spend the whole hour just on one movement of a, symphony or major band work, that kind of thing. But in the church choir, you don't have that luxury, and so we need to kind of keep things moving, and amateur singers especially want to keep things moving. Put the music out in the order in which it will be rehearsed. May seem obvious, but I've seen it done otherwise. And note somewhere the order in which it's going to be rehearsed. So if they get their music out of order, they can put it back in order, and that'll save some time there. So I don't put on the board, we're rehearsing Alleluia, measures 25 through 30, that's just for me to know. I just put, we're rehearsing Alleluia next, and so on. Critical, begin and end on time. These people are giving you their time. Honor it by beginning on time. Now, I said a moment ago, if the rehearsal started at 7, I would put on my rehearsal plan 7 o'clock, vocal warm-up or start on some piece or something. Actually, I would typically start about 3 minutes till. Why would I start before the stated time?
To train them to get there.
That's right. If you wait until they're all seated in their place with their music ready, it'll get later and later every rehearsal. So I start with a warm-up or something to let them know, those latecomers or people coming in, don't stand around and talk, get your music and get your seat. So start a couple of minutes early, even if it's just a warm-up or something there. But certainly then end on time as well. Now there's going to be the occasional rehearsal where it's going to have to go long, and especially if you're working on like Christmas music or something in addition to Sunday morning anthem schedule. But you explain to the choir, because we're coming up on Christmas, we're going to stay an extra 10 minutes or 15 or whatever it is, and they'll understand that. If you give them a choice between that and extra rehearsals, they'll take the longer rehearsals almost every time. Which doesn't mean you won't necessarily have extra rehearsals, but anyway. So I mentioned a moment ago, resist the temptation just to sing through the pieces, okay, all the way through. Now, when I would start a piece, the first time we sang it, we would sing it all the way through. I'd let them make all their mistakes, and then we wouldn't have to do any more rehearsal. It didn't quite work that way. But let them sight read it. If they can read, music, then let them sight read it, and they may surprise you at things you thought they would have trouble with, and they may not. But that gives them a chance to get a vision of the piece as a whole there. And then I would go back and not necessarily start at the beginning, though often, sometimes they'll start at the end of the piece or work on a section in the middle. So to break it down into smaller increments there. Keep the rehearsal moving. What is the greatest enemy of the choir director? Besides the pastor.
I was gonna say a choir
Talkers
member
is
that
a good
always
one.
distracts.
What?
Jokes. No, I was gonna say choir members that always distract.
Okay, that's the second greatest enemy.
Absences can be a problem.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, if they're not there,
Sopranos or miss,
yeah, sopranos can be an enemy. That's not quite what you meant.
Tenors too, though.
Yeah. Well, I think of the greatest enemy of the choir rehearsal is a choir director's time. It's not the singers, it's not the music, but it's time, because it seems like never enough time to get things exactly the way you want them to be. And that's why I look for every way I can to save time in the rehearsal. That's why I want the music out. That's why I want to keep the rehearsal moving. and those sorts of things. So always be time conscious. Now, I have my plan, things aren't going well, I'll take an extra 5 minutes on this piece. You know, I planned 10 minutes, but I'm gonna have to spend 15 on it because it's not going like I thought it would. That's fine, you know, plans are made to be changed. But when you do that, you realize you just cut 5 minutes out of the next piece or another piece following. And if I'm gonna insist on ending on time because I insist on beginning on time, then you see the dilemma that you get in. So you need, a lot of the preparation needs to be done by you before you ever get to the rehearsal. You need to know the music thoroughly. In fact, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but if at all possible, you should have the music at least almost memorized, if not indeed memorized. So you know what's coming up. You can give the choir the signals that they need to have in order to function properly. Now, I directed a chamber choir at a previous college I taught at, and it was a touring group and stuff. And I always had the music in front of me, but I pretty much had it up here because I expected them to memorize the music. And so should I do any less than that? Now realizing that, I don't mean this way it's gonna sound, I was the most important one because they relied on me then to give them their cues and tempos and everything. So I always had it in front of me in case I had a memory lapse, which did occasionally happen. I gotta tell you one story. We were singing this silly song called The Fly and the Flea. The fly and the flea, a fly and the flea, let's see if I can do it. The fly and the flea flew up through the flue, said the fly to the flea, what shall we do? Let us fly, said the flea, let us flee, said the fly, so they fluttered and flew through a flaw in the flue. Well, you know, I mean, imagine what it was like trying to rehearse that thing, but we were singing it in one performance, and this fly right past my ear, and the whole choir, of course, started busting up, and immediately skipped to the end of the piece. You know, just because it repeated that same thing several times, and the pianist just went like that, you know, got there, but, so you never know what's gonna happen. And, of course, when you choose a silly piece like that, you get what you deserve. Forgot where I was going with that story now. Anyway, memorize the music. Yeah, that's really important. At least get out of the music so you can look at them. Why is it important for you to look at the choir?
So they'll look at you.
Yeah, if you expect them to watch you, you should be able to watch them.
Yeah.
Any other reasons you could think of?
Communication.
Communication? Yeah.
I love watching the faces of the choir when they really are owning the music.
Yeah.
That's when we can.
It inspires you.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does.
It also, you can tell from looking at them when they're struggling, you know?
Yes.
So if you're watching them and you see the tenors all going like, or the tenor going like that, then you know something's wrong there, you know? Or if he's holding music upside down, you know, or something like that. So you can learn a lot, not even hearing it, but just watching the choir. Also, it inspires confidence in them. If they're looking at you and you look at them and give them that cue, then they're saying, okay, we agree that this is when I'm supposed to come in. Okay, let's say a word about conducting patterns here. I'm assuming you all know the standard conducting patterns, so that's kind of an assumption I'm making here. Choirs generally direct on correct standard conducting patterns more than instrumentalists do. You know, the band director can do this and there's no problem. But you do that in front of the choir and they look down momentarily and look back up, well, what beat are we on? You know, and so they depend on the standard conducting patterns more than instrumentalists. So it's important to keep that in mind. Conduct with one hand only, typically your right hand, but use the left hand then for cues and dynamics and those sorts of things as well. That doesn't mean you can't, you know, give a cue with just your right hand there, but it reinforces it the other way. One of the lessons I was taught was cue them every time their part has an entrance. And we were told as choir members to look up, look at the director once a measure, and every time your part has an entrance. So you look up at the beginning of the measure, and every time your part has an entrance, so you look up, and then look up again. So maybe you can impart those principles to your choir, that they do need to look up out of the music once in a while. Now, what to listen for in rehearsal? Obviously, wrong notes. You know, you want them to get the notes right, but that's true of any kind of rehearsal, I think. The way it works best for choirs is typically, what part do you just naturally gravitate to hearing?
In the part you sing.
I'm
The
sorry?
The part you sing.
Well, I'm talking about as a
The
listener.
harmony.
Oh.
Yeah, but the part you sing, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which one of the four
The
vocal
melody.
parts?
The melody.
Well, yeah.
Okay, the melody, which is usually
Soprano.
in the soprano, okay, so the soprano's gonna be pretty obvious to you. What's probably the second easiest part to hear?
The bass.
The bass, yeah, it forms the foundation of the ensemble, so where do you need to concentrate? The alto and tenor,
altos, always.
okay? Concentrate on those two middle parts and be aware of the outer parts when you're trying to detect wrong notes there. So concentrate on alto and tenor, being aware of the outer parts there. So that's one thing, obviously, is wrong notes. A second thing to listen for is uncertainty. Uncertainty of pitch, uncertainty of entrance. You know, if they're kind of hesitant to come in, what are some things you can do about that?
Well, the cue.
Okay, give them a cue. That assumes they're looking, but you should, if you have to stop, say, I'm gonna give you a cue, just watch me. What else?
Sometimes it just depends on the score, but if you've got a part in the alto and a part in the bass that are like, they're parallel motion, or they're essentially an octave apart,
Right,
pointed out to them, hey, you're just singing the lower part.
right.
So listen to them if you get off point,
Mhm.
you're together at this, so, don't let the tenors confuse.
Yeah. Okay, good. Another thing to listen for is intonation. What do I mean by intonation?
Pitch.
Pitch, yeah, but they're singing the right
How
pitch.
they're blending, how they're
but-
blending.
Yeah, blending.
You're not talking about enunciation of words?
No,
Okay.
it's in tune.
Yeah.
Is it in tune? You know, you can sing the right pitch, but be slightly off, and there's two or three that aren't quite on the right pitch there. And so listen for that as well. As I said before, you know, with a trumpet player, just press that valve, and if he has the right embouchure, the sound's gonna come out. And the choir singer has to think the sound. Well, the trumpet player does too, but the choir singer, I think, has to think it more. And that's often the key, say, think the sound before you sing it. There is helpful. A lot of intonation problems caused by the vowel sounds they're singing though. So those are two things and we'll say more about vowels in just a moment. Well, in fact, that's the next thing on my list there. Pronunciation is another thing to listen for. How are they saying the words?
The,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The is T-H-E-E and the is T-H-E. However, you say T-H-E, the sometime, whenever it precedes a vowel sound. Particularly, pure sustained vowels is what you're looking for. It's the vowels that should be sustained, with certain exceptions, like you might sing amen, like that. But typically speaking, the vowels are going to be where you have the longest period there. And you want those to be unified, meaning everybody's singing it in the same way, and want them to be pure, so there's, you know, not a mixture of vowels in there. They're all singing essentially the same vowels. Now, one of the most difficult kinds of vowel sounds is a diphthong. What is a diphthong?
Two vowels together.
Yeah, Savior is a common word. And where should the emphasis be placed? The second vowel. Savior, get to the second vowel as soon as possible, just barely touching the first vowel. So listen for somebody going Savior, kind of thing. By the way, if you detect one person doing something like that, don't say, "Hey, Joe." Basses, we need to unify our vowel, or choir, we need to do this. So don't, point them out individually, but make it be as a group. Now, you may have, like I had one alto church choir director who said, "Not me, it's not me," Okay, well, but the section as a whole.
Or if you have just one person.
Yeah, well, yeah. And don't say altos.
That's when you say choir.
Yeah, that's right. I'll give you a couple of options there.
Everybody.
I think it's great when the choir member goes, "Oh, that was me." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh," and then I'll have to be like, "No, it wasn't
Don't worry
just
about
you. It was it was a sectional group effort."
You may have been guilty, but there are others as well,
Right.
other
I
sinners.
don't want him to take the fall for it.
Another thing to listen for in pronunciation is final consonant sounds. I don't know how many choirs I've heard sing what I would call English German. Dear Gott, what's the difference between Gott and God?
Gott
The last
is
letter.
German for God.
Yeah, it's German for God. That's the last letter, but I mean,
Well, it's either a T or a D.
it's either T
Yeah.
or D. What's the
Yeah.
difference between T and D?
It's a totally different word.
Yeah.
They're soft plosive consonants, right?
Yeah,
It's
And they're cognate to each
Yeah.
other, T and.
one's called voiced and one's called
Oh, yeah, that's
unvoiced.
right.
Oh.
Which is which?
Which is unvoiced.
Duh.
They're formed exactly the same way. It's just whether you use the vocal cords or not. Duh, tuh, duh, buh, the P and B there. And on a voiced consonant, you typically have to have a little in there. Duh, duh, to make the sound come out. So if they're saying Gott, then somehow you need to get them to use their vocal cord. God, God. Now don't, they'll exaggerate and go God, like that. So you have to, there's typically a bass in the back row that does that. Any other questions about unity of vowel sound, pure vowel sound, final consonants are particularly, and diphthongs are particularly difficult. Remember, the purpose of the choir is ultimately not for them to enjoy singing, although that is a valid thing, okay? The ultimate purpose is for them to minister to the congregation. And the only way you can do that really effectively is to pronounce the words in such a way that they're both beautiful and understandable. So if you can't hear it, I can't understand as the director, and you know the words, the congregation may not be able to either.
The word "and," the conjunction "and," I think most Americans, certainly the American South, are inclined to pronounce it without thinking it's "and." Our choir director insists that we sing it "and."
That sounds a little Episcopal to me,
Well,
but.
it's Presbyterian, and she grew up Baptist, I
Yeah.
think, like I did. But,
Yeah, and
is it "and" better, or is it?
I
just
would say
think it's-
"and," but that's, because I'm from California, that's not. Actually, I was born in Oklahoma, but,
Could just be a way to try to get everybody
Yeah.
to sing the same way.
yeah, I think so.
So
Just
that way
from-
you don't get half and half.
Yeah, and if you're from East Texas, it's and.
Yeah.
That's pretty close to Alabama.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
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 We call that the West Texas diphthong.
Heidi, y'all.
Yeah. Whatever region you're from, we all have our little,
I wonder if,
Thanks.
Bach had that problem with the Southern Germans and the Northern. I don't know the answer to your question there. I don't know why she does, except that's just,
Well,
the
it was the
way.
way her high school choral director taught,
Yeah,
and we sang "and." Well, the choir does.
We tend to
Played the
teach-
piano, the
yeah.
organ.
We tend to teach the way we were taught,
Yes,
so.
yes.
Possibly preference too, I mean.
It may be.
Because I know some people disagree on how you say Alleluia, for instance, or certain Latin words.
Yeah. Let me tell you how I pronounce that word. Alleluia.
Alleluia.
I make the last sound rhyme with the first sound. Alleluia, not hallelujah.
Right.
Alleluia, because I find it just opens up the word, it seems like. There's another word, well, this probably isn't relevant here, but another thing I used to tell my choirs when we were singing a Latin piece, the hardest word you're going to sing in this Gloria in excelsis Deo is the I-N. Because every time they want to go Gloria in excelsis Deo, but it's in excelsis Deo, and it always drives me up the wall when I hear a choir saying that. That's just me. Okay, back to my notes here. If at all possible, don't sing along with the choir.
That is hard.
I know. I'm talking about in rehearsal particularly. Now, that Sunday morning's gonna come where the tenor doesn't show up and you have to sing the tenor line to make the piece work. Okay, you know, we've all been there and all done that. But in rehearsal, try not to sing along with the choir. Don't even hum along with them. You can't really listen and sing at the same time. Now, you can, if you say, okay, basically we need to rehearse this part, go ahead and sing that with them, you know, as long as you can hear them, if you're just working on pitches and that sort of thing. But and talk about when the old choir is singing, you can't fully hear them and sing at the same time. So just try to make it a habit not to sing with them. Now, if you've been doing that, just kind of need to wean them away from that. And they need to follow the piano or follow something besides your voice. A busy singer is a happy singer. Don't give them a chance to start yakking.
Oh.
If you don't want them to talk, keep them singing. That's the best way I know to keep them from wasting rehearsal time with talking. Now, there's nothing wrong with talking in fellowship. That's a part of the choir too. So don't shut it down completely, but give them time, you know, at the right time, not during every time there's a pause in the music. So what happens if, okay, everybody's doing pretty well, but the sopranos are messing up? So what do?
You work with the piano, the sopranos.
Okay, you work with the sopranos. So what is the rest of the choir doing?
You get them to sing along with
There
sing
you
the
go,
soprano
yeah.
line.
Let them sing the soprano line with it, you know.
And that helps them to hear the part better
Right.
too.
And it helps, also sometimes helps humble the other parts of the choir who are, you know, well, we got our part, well, look at what they have to do, you know. So all kinds of reasons to, and not to let them just sit there, because they won't just sit there, they'll start talking and start doing other things, and then you've lost that part. It helps them with sight reading skills.
Or they'll sing along in their part,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then you can't really hear the sopranos.
Right. Another thing you can do is have them hum their part while the sopranos are singing the words. So, you know, at least it keeps them involved somehow.
You do have to remember to always repeat, especially if you've got some people in your choir who are hard of hearing, because
What?
you can even say to like sopranos, okay, we're gonna do the sopranos only, and then you're still based, like you're saying,
Right.
start singing, and it's like, oh, no, oh, no, it's like, you know, you say it, you just
Right.
make sure you go with the speed of their misunderstanding.
Another thing about not wasting time is don't waste time with long piano introductions and interludes. I sang in a church choir not too long ago where there'd be a 22 measure introduction. The piano, we'd be, you know, rehearsing the piece for the first time, the pianist would play the introduction very beautifully, we'd fail to come in.
Yeah.
So the director would have the pianist start at the beginning again. And I'm thinking, that's a waste of time. Give us a measure before we come in and let us have another shot at it. If there's 35 measures in the middle of the piece, you don't need to rehearse that. You know, skip over to the next place or give a little lead in there. And so the pianist doesn't need the rehearsal probably near as much as the choir does. Also, I think it's a good idea to let the choir sing a cappella occasionally in rehearsal. Yeah, even if it's only for a short period, or just a phrase, or just sing a hymn a cappella, it's good to wean them away from the piano even a little bit. Or even if it's only a single line, like, okay, the sopranos were mentioned are having trouble with this line. Let's sing it a couple of times with the piano, now let's sing it a couple of times without. They say that you don't really know your part until you can sing it by itself, you know, so without any accompaniment. Okay, choosing music. Obviously, you're gonna choose music that's within the capabilities of the choir. Now, I say obviously, but from adjudicating some choir festivals, that's not always been the case. Back in particularly the 1980s, when I was adjudicating a lot of church choir festivals, which were much more common than they are now, this choir would come in and they would sing this piece of, you know, the latest pop Christian song in an arrangement there for choir, and it would keep modulating up, you know, at the end, and the sopranos couldn't hit it in the first key, but they keep modulating up, and then they were even further away from it every time. So make sure that they can sing the music that's in the right range for the singers that you have available. If you don't have any tenors, choose SAB music, or music that you can adapt to be SAB. If your sopranos can only sing up to an E, don't give them any music higher than an E, except once in a while they need to move up to an F, just to, you know, stretch their capabilities a little bit. That's part of the teaching thing. If none of your bassists can read music, then find pieces where they sing the melody, you know, or they have one pitch most of the time, you know. So there are all kinds of options. You can still do good music and do it well, even under those times. For those potentially low attendance Sundays, you know, the Sunday after the Christmas program, or the Sunday, the weekend of July 4th, when July 4th is on Monday, you know, and they're all gonna be out of town. Find something in unison or two-part that you can alternate men and women if you have enough of those kinds of parts and that sort of thing. So, choosing the music wisely. There, kind of my final things here. Don't be afraid to ask for advice. If you got a question, I'll be glad to try to answer it. You know, send me an email. There's just david_music@baylor.edu. But help is probably closer to home in your church pianist. The pianist often hears things that the conductor can't, right? Which is always interested me, because they've got all this other stuff going on, yet they're hearing the choir, you know, and I'll stop the choir and they come to play the tenor note, because, you know, he or she knows that that's where the problem is. And I've always been amazed by that. But don't be afraid to ask the pianist, how did that sound? You know, or what do you think about this? They'll be glad to help there. Maybe ask somebody in the congregation, how'd the choir sound last Sunday? If you can, if it's somebody who'll give you an honest answer, not just, oh, they were great, you know, kind of thing. The pianist can be your best friend there, or your worst nightmare. There. You're never any better than your pianist or your accompanist is. One last thing, exude confident humility. Confident humility. Confidence comes from knowing what you're doing. Okay, you've prepared to the best of your ability, both, you know, this specific piece and your musical skills. So you're confident that you know what you're doing, but you're a servant of the choir, of the music, and ultimately of the Lord. And so you're humble in that sense of the word. So confident humility is what you should always strive for as a church choir director. Now, what questions or comments might you have, or experiences you'd like to relate?
One thing I found that has been helpful in singing anthems is I can find a recording of it either from their website or whatever, to send that out in an email to the choir members so that they can hear it ahead of time and at least have an idea of what it sounds
Yeah.
like. Because most of my choir members don't read music.
Right.
And they come from such a varied background, you know, and most of it is not in music at all, but
Yeah.
they just enjoy singing. So that has really helped.
Good suggestion.
And they, that's one thing that I've found. So,
The one drawback that I see with recordings is they try to sing it like the recording and.
well, they
which-
do, and a lot of times they'll say, "Are we gonna sing it at that tempo?"
Yeah.
You know? And I'll just say, "Well, it depends. Let's try it
When
this
I've-
tempo first."
When I've used recordings, I found it to be more helpful to rehearse it a time or two and then give them the recording, even though, you know,
That's
they,
a good thought, too.
if they, because then they have an idea of it before they hear the recording, and then they may say, but I typically haven't used recordings very much, but it's a good idea, yeah, that use every tool that's available.
Well, I mean, we do have a pianist, but
Mhm.
just to get them familiar with it.
Right. Good idea. Others?
At my church, the choir director has resigned. She plans to remain as a member of the choir, but she and her husband want to travel more, so she won't be there every Sunday. I'm the pianist for the choir and the organist for the congregation. So it's possible that I'm going to be trying to do both, both choir director and pianist. Do you
I'll
have
move
some
you up on my
suggestions?
prayer list here.
Well, thank you.
That presents special challenges.
It does, and I've learned to nod my head. And the piano fortunately is right in front of the choir loft, so folks can see me.
Do you normally sing, I mean, in the service with the piano, kind of choir?
Not really, not much. Sometimes I do a little bit.
Mhm.
I mean, I may sing part of the anthem, at least.
No, I mean, do you accompany on the piano or the organ?
Oh,
for the
I
service?
play the organ for the service. We don't usually use both instruments, although we do have both instruments. But I play the piano. I come over from the
Yeah.
organ to the piano.
To play with for the choir.
For the choir. Now, when we have had our choir director and have had an anthem that, you know, that called for organ, I'd stay at the organ, and
Mhm.
she would conduct. I'm not sure whether I could, the organ is over on the other side of
Sure.
the sanctuary. And so I don't, the choir folks say that, you know, they really can't see me there, that's probably true. But they can, but they can't, not nearly as well as when they're just right
Sure.
above me.
Sure.
But yes, it does present some interesting challenges.
Yeah. And then in rehearsal too, you've got your hands full, don't you?
Yes, I think I will.
Yeah.
We were talking about the conducting patterns. What do you do with 3/2?
Yeah,
I know I must look like a.
it
I
depends
don't
on
know
the
what's
tempo.
standing up there.
If it's a fast 3/2, then just use a 3-beat pattern. But if it's a slow 3/2, then you have to subdivide it, so it's 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2. Just give it a second bounce there in
Okay. But go back to the fast, because that's your.
1, 2, 3.
Just a
1.
regular?
Yeah, just a regular 3.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter what the bottom number is, if the top number is 3, but 3/2 typically implies a slow tempo. Technically, it doesn't. I mean, it shouldn't. But if it's a fast tempo, then I just use a 3-beat pattern,
Okay.
or a moderate tempo. But if it's a slow 3, then I
Well, I
subdivide
can't,
it.
obviously can't think of the song, you know, when you're put on the spot. But
Yeah.
Sunday, it was just like, oh my gosh, just what do I do? I mean, I come from a singing background, and I started, September will be a year ago that I've done this, and I just, you know, it's been a steep learning curve, you know, standing on that side
Yeah,
of the,
it's quite a bit
oh
different
my
when it's all.
oh, yes, it is. So, to get everything lined up, and you're recording this, right?
Yeah, we
I'll
won't
talk to you
distribute.
later.
Be sure to get her name.
Yeah, all right, yeah, now.
What was that?
Did y'all see that video
Any other questions or experiences? I tell you one thing, there's no people on earth I like any better than church choir singers. There's just something about those people. They tend to be the most faithful members of the church. They tend to be very giving people and forgiving people there. And so if you approach them in humility, remembering this, that they probably know more about your job than you know about theirs, you know. If you come from their ranks, then I'm sure they're forgiving, you know, of errors and things that you might make. But I just love church choir singers. They're a good breed of folk. Few old sore heads, but.
Well, that makes for variety, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
nice, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the Alleluia conference.